I did forget to mention that homeless feed. I wanted to thank everyone who was able to do that. Christina and I were out at winter retreat with the students, so we weren't able to, but I heard that it was awesome that you guys had a great time and were able to minister to those, to that community and that need. So thank you so much for being a part of that. I also wanted to mention the Pinewood Derby. You noticed on the video that the 27th, which is a Saturday, is when that Pinewood Derby is going to be in Huntsville. On the Thursday night before that is when we are going to have our church Pinewood Derby, and we get to race our cars before we actually take them and put them in the main competition. So I will beat you guys, and then I will give a trophy to whoever comes in second, because I think it would be awkward to buy myself a trophy. So I also wanted to address last week, I hate any time we have to cancel services. And last week there were a couple of things that went into that decision, so I wanted to share that with you. The first is that I spoke with a friend of mine who lives about 5 or 6 minutes from my house. At my house, it was great. It was perfect. The roads were fine. He lives 5 or 6 minutes away, just towards Springdale a little bit, and he said he had a 1/4 inch of glass on his windshield. It took him 30 minutes to thaw it, and then he nearly slid into the ditch when he left his house. So I know that we had people coming from all over, and I felt like it was better to be safe than sorry. Also, I knew that all of our teenage babies were over in Siloam Springs at winter retreat. Keely was going to bring them home that morning, and I definitely trusted her to be able to get them home, but I looked at iDrive Arkansas on the internet, and it said that 412 between the interstate and Siloam Springs was covered in ice. And so I felt the responsibility to go over to Siloam Springs and make sure that our kids got home safe. And so I went to Siloam Springs, found out that iDrive was wrong, had a good breakfast with one of my good friends, and told Keely, bring our kids home. And so I did miss getting to see everyone, and I hated canceling, but I wanted to let you know how that happened. If we had been in service last week, what I would have said was, how was your Christmas? Did everyone have a good time and get everything that you wanted from Santa Claus? I can tell you that with the exception of a little stomach bug that I got over Christmas week, it was probably one of the best Christmas seasons that I can remember for our family. We had the awesome opportunity to come together on Christmas Eve and celebrate with you all and have an awesome Christmas Eve service. And then that night, Christina and I got to spend some very precious time with our kids who we don't get to spend that much time with anymore, especially with Courtney being gone to college. And it was exciting, and I got some pretty cool presents that I was happy about. So I had a great Christmas. It was much better, and I was much happier than little Jeremy, whose letter to Santa I came across the week after Christmas on Facebook. Jeremy writes, "Dear Santa, I'm writing this on the day after Christmas, and I am very sad. I only received one of the 2 presents I asked for. Since you ate my cookies, I will assume that my missing gift was a mistake, and I will give you 1 week to fix this. Signed, Jeremy." Wow. Now, did anyone see this online? If you saw this, there were actually several more letters back and forth between Santa and Jeremy. All of Jeremy's letters were handwritten with poor spelling, and all of Santa's letters were typed for some reason. Santa tells Jeremy that he's sorry he's disappointed, but that the presents he asked for were both very expensive, and that he needs to learn to be more thankful for what he has or risk being put on the naughty list next year. To which Jeremy replies, "Hey, fatty, you shouldn't be worried about what it costs because you have elf slaves make the toys for you anyways." And then Santa replies and says, "I've told your parents that I'm very disappointed in you and asked them to take away your Wii U," the one present that he did receive, "until your attitude gets better." I think we can all agree that Jeremy is not very happy about Christmas, right? And while I don't think his attitude or his response are appropriate at all, one thing I think we can respect about Jeremy is how badly he wanted those 2 presents. Have you ever wanted something as badly as Jeremy did? Perhaps there's something you want that badly now. And I don't mean in a negative way. I don't mean you're stomping your feet and throwing a fit and calling Santa fatty. Maybe there's something good that you want that badly right now. I know that there are several things that I would like to see take place in 2018, both personally and for our church. And the question that Jeremy's story has me asking myself, and the question that I ask you all today, is how badly do you want it? Today we're going to be reading from Matthew chapter 17, verses 14 through 21. Now today I'm going to be reading from the modern King James Version. I'm mixing it up a little bit, but because I am, and I know that probably nobody has that version with you, we are going to put it on the screen today to save you the trouble. So from the modern King James, Matthew 17, verses 14 through 21, says, "And when they came to the crowd, a man came to him, kneeling down to him, and saying, 'Lord, have mercy on my son, for he is a lunatic and grievously vexed. For oftentimes he falls into the fire, and often into the water. And I brought him to your disciples, and they could not cure him.' Then Jesus answered and said, 'O faithless and perverse generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I suffer you? Bring him here to me.' Verse 18 says, 'And Jesus rebuked the demon, and he departed out of him, and the child was cured from that very hour. Then the disciples came to Jesus apart and said, 'Why could we not cast him out?' And Jesus said to them, 'Because of your unbelief. For truly I say to you, if you have faith like a grain of mustard seed, you shall say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it shall move. And nothing shall be impossible to you. However, this kind does not go out except by prayer and fasting.'" Now let me set the stage for you here. Jesus has just come down from what we refer to as the Mount of Transfiguration. Jesus goes up on the mountain with his three closest disciples, and all of a sudden, Moses and Elijah appear there, for lack of a better term, in the flesh with Jesus. The disciples freak out and decide, hey, let's build 3 temples here, one for each of you. And Jesus is like, no, you don't even understand. So after this happens, they come down from the mountain, Jesus with Peter, James, and John, and they find the other 9 disciples with this man whose son is possessed by a demon. Most scholars believe that he had a demon that caused epilepsy. That when the man refers to him throwing himself into the fire or into the water, that what's happening here is the boy is having seizures. The man explains that he brought his son to the disciples, but they were unable to heal him. And Jesus immediately casts the demon out and heals the boy. Can you imagine what that must have felt like for the disciples? Way back in an earlier part of the book of Matthew, which, by the way, it's really weird to me. It seems like we've spent the past 2 months in the book of Matthew, and that's not even where I'm at in my daily reading plan. It's just the Lord is orchestrating us hanging out with Matthew for a while. But way back in Matthew chapter 10, we read where Jesus calls the disciples together and gives them authority over unclean spirits to cast them out, to heal all kinds of sickness and all kinds of disease. Then in Matthew 10, verse 8, Jesus tells them, heal the sick, cleanse the lepers, raise the dead, cast out demons. You have received freely, so freely give. So that's what the disciples have been spending their time doing. They have been traveling from town to town and village to village, casting out demons, healing the sick, and probably raising the dead. That's most definitely why the man brought his son to the disciples in the first place, because he heard of the miracles that they had been performing. But let's put ourselves in the disciples' place this morning. They've been traveling from city to city working miracles. Their confidence has to be at an all-time high. They've been doing things that no other person has ever done and that they've never done before in their life. And then suddenly, they're presented with this boy. So what do? They probably call him forward and place their hand on them to pray for them, just like they've done time and time again. And then right there in front of everybody, nothing happens. The boy doesn't get healed. The demon is not cast out. How embarrassing. I bet that they wanted to crawl into a hole somewhere and just hide. And you know what I imagine they wanted more than anything that they had probably ever wanted before in their life? I know what I would want. I would want to know what went wrong and what could I do to make sure that it never happened again. And I don't just mean for selfish reasons. Now, surely there were some of those, because have you ever tried to do something big in front of other people and failed? That must have been embarrassing. The only thing, the best story that I could find from my own life, because apparently I'm a success at everything, is when I was a teenager, my grandfather taught me how to drive in an old GMC pickup truck. And these are the trucks, none of the younger people in the congregation will know what I'm talking about, but you would brighten and dim the lights with a little pedal or a little button. It was a little round knob about that big that was on the floor, and you would just kick it, and that would make the lights bright or dim. And I had seen this done lots of times. I knew how it worked. I knew what it was about. But my grandfather took me to take the driving test, and the state trooper was standing in front of the vehicle and said, turn on the blinkers, and I did, and turn on the other blinkers, and I did. And he said, turn on the headlights, and I did. And he said, put them on bright. So I looked to the floor where the carpet of this truck was all torn up and out of place, so there was no little round button. And I knew that I'd seen it before, so I start looking, and up under the dash, there's a silver round thing about that big. So I kick it. It was not the thing to make the lights bright. It was the thing to make the blinkers work. And I don't mean it was designed to be used to make the blinkers work. I mean it was the electronic component that the blinkers would use if I hadn't kicked it to blink or not blink. And I failed the test without ever leaving the parking lot. I was such a disappointment to my grandfather that day. He talked for a long, long time about how I didn't know how to brighten the lights. It was embarrassing. But more than just being selfish, more than just not wanting to look bad in front of other people, I think the disciples faced something that was even worse. What's worse than not being able to do something in front of other people is not being able to help someone who comes to you in need. To me, that's the worst feeling in the world. I remember a time in my life when, for whatever reason, the Lord chose to use me to pray for people and they were healed. And this went on for a few months. I would pray for people and they would be healed. And there was nothing special about me at all, except for maybe that I had the faith that he would do it, and that the more that I prayed for people and they were healed, the more faith I had. But it all started with, there was a woman in our church who had a problem with her arm, and it was giving her a lot of pain. And she was actually a choir teacher at school, and it was affecting her job. And she also helped lead worship at the church, and she wasn't able to lift her hands. And she was just miserable with this pain in her arms. And I felt like the Lord told me to go pray for her. So I did. I went and I prayed for her. And she told me later that when I placed my hand on her arm, that she felt a warmth shoot through her arm, and that immediately she knew she was healed. And it was a really cool thing to see somebody get healed when you prayed for them. And it happened time and time again. And it actually turned into an unhealthy situation, because I realized later that anytime they were going to pray for someone to receive healing, before they did, this woman would come and get me to go be a part of this prayer, which was completely wrong. But while I knew that God is sovereign, and I knew that not everyone who we prayed for to be healed would be healed in that moment, I still remember that every time we prayed for someone to receive healing and they didn't, I felt the saddest feeling I've ever felt in my life. And I would look into their eyes and see the same look that I'm sure the disciples saw in the Father's eyes on this day, when he just knew his son was going to be healed because he had found the right people, and he wasn't. Can you imagine being this father? How many doctors must have he taken his son to? How many healers, spiritual and otherwise, must have he visited? How badly must he have wanted to see his son healed and be able to live a normal life? He wanted it so badly that when he brought his son to these men who had been traveling around healing people and casting out demons, when he brought his son to those men and they weren't able to do it, he said, "Is there anybody else that I can talk to?" He said, "Maybe there's a supervisor that I could talk to that has more authority in spiritual matters than you do." He said, "I don't think you understand how badly I want this." He wanted his son to be healed so badly that he was not going to take no for an answer on that day. So we find ourselves presented with the critical question of the day. If the disciples wanted so badly to heal this boy, both for their own selfish pride or self-esteem, and also just to help him, and if the father wanted so badly for his son to be healed, and if little Jeremy wanted so badly to get both presents that he asked for from Santa, then why didn't these things happen? Well, I will leave you to your own devices in deciding what went wrong in Jeremy's situation. But luckily, Jesus didn't do the same thing in the situation with this boy. Because Jesus gives the answer both publicly and privately as to why the disciples were not able to cast the demon out and heal the boy. When he's first presented with the situation, Hello? When he's first presented with the situation, he says, "O faithless and perverse generation, how long shall I be with you?" And then when he finds himself alone with the disciples in the house and they say, "Why couldn't we do it?" He says, "Because of your unbelief. For truly I say to you, if you have faith like the grain of a mustard seed, you shall say to this mountain, 'Move from here to there,' and it shall move, and nothing shall be impossible to you." Jesus says that their unbelief, their lack of faith, is what kept them from being able to work this miracle. And then he goes on to tell them how powerful that faith is. He says, if you have just a little bit, like the faith of a mustard seed, you can move mountains. Have you ever seen a mustard seed? Some pastor friends of ours went to Israel some time back. That's a really cool trip. Someday I plan to take that. But when they came back, they brought several of us gifts. And my gift was a little brown cup about the size of a thimble that had probably 100 mustard seeds in it. Those things are so tiny. But when they're planted in good soil, they grow into this huge bush. It can reach like 8 to 10 feet high. And Jesus, earlier in the book of Matthew, is talking about the mustard plant, how it starts with such a small seed, but then becomes something so large that birds can actually nest in it. Jesus tells them, you didn't have faith. That's why you couldn't perform this miracle. He says if you had just a little bit of faith, you could move mountains. nothing, including working this miracle, would be impossible to you. But then he says something else. He says, if you only had faith, nothing would be impossible for you. But, man, Jesus likes that word, doesn't he? How many times have we heard Jesus say that over the past couple of months? Nothing would be impossible for you, but this kind does not go out except by prayer and fasting. Now, let me tell you something. For the longest time, for basically my entire adult life, I have believed that what Jesus told the disciples was that the reason they couldn't cast this demon out was because it was some special kind of demon that would only come out with a lot of prayer and fasting. That's what I believed, but in studying it more, I don't believe that that does justice to the scriptures. I think it's completely ignoring what Jesus said immediately before that when he referred to their lack of faith. So I'm going to turn this into a more simple version, a paraphrase, if you will, of this passage and tell you what I believe the text is saying. The disciples asked why they couldn't perform this miracle, and Jesus said, you didn't have enough faith. He said, faith is a very powerful thing. With it, you can even move mountains. He said, now obviously you do have some faith because you've been traveling around performing miracles and because you did attempt to perform this miracle. But your faith isn't strong enough to perform this miracle. And having enough faith to do this only comes through prayer and fasting. You see, I think Jesus teaches us a valuable lesson here, that there is a link between faith and prayer and fasting. That doing one builds up the other. Prayer and fasting, when done together, build our faith. So I ask you, what do you want this year? What do you want in 2018? And how badly do you want it? You see, this is a new year. And this is a time when a lot of people will make lists of things that they want to do better or change about themselves. People will make these lists of resolutions and they'll want to work out more or eat better or lose weight or quit smoking or quit drinking or get out of debt or stop looking at pornography or get a new car or get a new job or get a new relationship. And that's not what I'm talking about here. Unless I am. Because let me tell you, if your health or your smoking or your drinking or your financial situation or your addiction to pornography or your job or your car or anything else in your life is keeping you from doing what God wants you to do, then perhaps you need a miracle in that area of your life. If you've tried countless times to start or stop doing something and you just can't, perhaps you need God to intervene. And perhaps you need faith that He's going to do so. There are no doubt individuals here today who need a miracle in 2018. There are people who need a new job, who need a relationship restored, who need to be healthier, who need a financial miracle in their life. I know that personally there are some things that I want to see transpire in my life and in my family. Some of these things are new revelations to me, things that the Lord has told me that need to change. And others are things that I've worked towards for some time. And as your pastor, I'll tell you there's a whole list of things I have that I want to see happen for our church in 2018. I want to see us grow numerically and financially so that we can be stable and healthy moving forward. I want to see the amount of ministry that we're doing outside the church grow exponentially. I want to see us make an impact in Northwest Arkansas, that same impact that we all got so excited about when we started this new work 14 weeks ago. There are things that the Lord has laid on my heart. Many of those I'll share with you in the coming weeks. But here's what I do know. Many of the things that I want to see happen in my life and in my family, and many of the things that I know need to happen in our church, cannot happen without the Lord working a miracle. And I'll just be really transparent and honest with you. My faith is not enough. So I'm going to commit myself to a life of prayer and fasting. And I'm inviting you, even challenging you, to join me. You see, I need more faith. The writer of Hebrews tells us that faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things unseen. I think that sometimes we say that passage, but we don't grasp the reality of it. There are things that we all hope for in 2018. There are things that we hope will happen. But without faith, that's exactly what those are. They're just hopes. But when we apply faith to our hopes, it gives them substance. It makes them real. Substance is something that you can hold. It's something tangible. And I don't want to live this year just hoping for things that will never take place. I want these hopes to take substance. So I'm going to begin this year with a 21-day fast. And I'm asking you to join me. Now, obviously, it would have been a little better if the sermon was preached at the moment that it was originally scheduled for, the last day of 2017. But I don't think the Lord is bound by calendars. I think he'll be okay if we start on the 8th instead of the 1st. And at least we got to snack while we watched football. Now I know what some of you are thinking. Something along the lines of, is this boy crazy? He wants us to not eat for 21 days. But let me explain what I'm actually asking. I'm asking that starting tomorrow or the next day or a week from now, whatever day you and the Lord decide that you're going to start, I'm asking that you commit to some form of fasting for 21 days. For some of you, that may mean a total fast where all you do is drink water for 21 days. That sounds like the most difficult thing in the world if you've never done it. I have done that before. Actually, I didn't do a total fast. I had communion every morning and then nothing else for 21 days. And by about the 16th day, you're not even hungry anymore. But some of you may do that. Others may say, you know what? I'm going to do a juice fast. I'm going to do nothing but liquids. So I'm going to have V8, so I'm getting my nutrients that I know I need. I'm going to have juices. Some of you may want to try a Daniel fast. I don't know exactly what that consists of, but it's something along the lines of fruits, nuts, and grains. There's lots of information online. Maybe some of you say, you know what, I'll do this with you, but for 21 days, I'm just going to fast lunch for 21 days. Or I'm just going to fast dinner for 20. I'm not going to not eat anything, but I'm going to give up one meal a day for 21 days and spend time in prayer and fasting. There may even be people here who, for health reasons, you can't change your diet at all. Well, maybe you decide to give up something else for 21 days. Maybe you decide to fast television or movies or Facebook, which we should all do. Maybe you decide to give up your phone or computer games. I'm not here to tell you what or even when to do this in your life. I'm just asking that you join together with me for 21 days of fasting and prayer. Let me be very clear, and prayer. Because a lot of people, what they will do is diet and call it fasting. Jesus didn't say you need to fast. He said fasting and prayer. So I'm asking you to join me for 21 days of fasting and prayer for your needs, the needs of your church family, and the needs and direction of CenterPoint Church. Let's join together and see what we can do in 2018. Better yet, let's join together and see what God can do in 2018 when we ask Him. And here's what we're going to do. There's no shame. I'll tell you what, for years and years, anytime there would be what I refer to as a called fast, I would almost, I can't even think of the word, I would almost completely not participate. Because I always said, God will tell me when He wants me to fast. And then I would feel guilty about it. But there's no shame whatsoever. Some of you, you're like, you know what? Some of you, the Lord's already been stirring this in your spirit. Some of you may have started on the first, and I don't even know it. But there's no shame here. If you want to participate, that's awesome. If you don't, that's fine too. But I just want to know who's going to do this with me. Just raise your hand. Guys, I think this is going to make a difference. I really do. I see husbands looking at wives. That's funny. He's like, you may be doing it, but you're still cooking. I think the wives should look back and say, no, you're cooking. Let's pray. Lord, thank you so much for the opportunity to be in your house. God, I am excited about 2018. Lord, I'm more excited about this year than I've probably ever been about any year in my life. Lord, as we commit to doing what you have called us to do, I know what's going to happen. I know that tomorrow the devil's going to show up with donuts at the office. Or he's going to have long lost friends reach out of nowhere and say, hey, can I take you to lunch? But Lord, I pray that you will give us the resolve to do whatever it is that we commit in our hearts to do. Lord, I know that we don't all have to do the same thing. But I pray that once we make a decision, that we will stick to it. And Lord, I pray that you will change our lives for the better. That you will change the lives of those around us for the better. And that you will do miraculous things in our church family. Lord, build our faith. In Jesus' name. Amen. Well, guys, I'm excited. And knowing me, I will probably plan some sort of a church lunch for the end of this thing. it's going to be great. Thank you so much for coming today. I truly love and appreciate you all. Can't wait to see you again next week. God bless you. You're dismissed.